The screen flickered to life, not with the expected video, but with a live feed of the viewer's own room. A cold, metallic scent filled the air, as if ozone had just crackled through the space. Then, a soft, wet scratching sound began from inside the walls, rhythmic and deliberate. On the screen, the figure in the feed slowly turned its head. But the person at the desk had not moved a muscle. A damp, sticky sensation crept up the viewer's neck, though nothing was there to touch them. The figure on the monitor leaned closer, its whisper not from the speakers, but seeming to form directly inside the listener's mind. This was the moment they realized the signal wasn't being received, it was being broadcast. Now, close your eyes. Picture that rain-slicked street, the diner's neon sign sputtering like a dying heartbeat. The air carries the sharp tang of ozone and damp concrete, and in every window, those silhouettes, frozen, watching, the screen plunged into absolute blackness. A single heartbeat echoed, each thud growing fainter and more distant. Count to 3. 1, 2. All sound vanished, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. Now, open them. The video returned, but the street lay deserted, a ghost of its former self. The diner was now a rotted, boarded-up shell, its windows like vacant eyes. A thick, cloying scent of decay and damp earth hung in the stagnant air. Nearby, the lone lamppost stood rusted and bent, as if bowed by an unseen weight. This is what happens when you blink in the town of Perdition, Ohio. A town that only exists when you're not looking. The backstory. 3 days earlier, for Sarah and Mike Lawson, this was meant to be their clean slate. A new job in Chicago. Their entire life crammed into an SUV. A single, determined line north on Interstate 77. Sarah, ever the meticulous planner, had charted their course down to the minute. Mike, ever the optimist, was simply content behind the wheel. Then, the GPS on his dashboard flickered, its screen dissolving into a digital mosaic. A moment later, the storm descended, a tempest that had never appeared on any radar. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone, and a deep, unnatural quiet settled over the road ahead. The fog thickened like a solid wall, swallowing the highway until Mike could only crawl forward, white-knuckling the wheel. Then, without warning, the fog simply parted, revealing an old, faded exit sign. Perdition, 1 mile. Sarah's voice cut through the heavy air, frustrated and tense. That's not on the map. We passed Mansfield 20 minutes ago. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and damp earth, as if the road itself was holding its breath. Mike's voice was frayed with exhaustion as he insisted. It's shelter, Sarah. I can't see 10 feet ahead. The storm had swallowed the world whole, reducing visibility to a suffocating, ink-black shroud. A metallic scent of ozone and wet asphalt hung thick in the damp, claustrophobic air. We find a gas station. The words, a grim anchor, and waited out. The car turned off the exit, and the road became a tunnel of gnarled, overgrown trees that scraped against the windows. Then, abruptly, the oppressive canopy gave way. Before us lay the town of Perdition, bathed in a strangely flat afternoon light. It was perfectly still. Not a soul moved. Not a curtain fluttered in the dead air that carried a faint, coppery scent. A 1950s-era Main Street materialized from the mist. A hardware store with a hand-painted sign, the Perdition Diner. A few old cars parked at angles, but the sidewalks were empty. The storefronts dark behind their windows. The air carried the faint, metallic scent of ozone and old gasoline. It was like driving into a postcard that had been left out in the rain too long. The diner's silence felt like a physical force, dense and oppressive, pressing against the car's windows. Inside, the air was thick, with the scent of old grease and something faintly metallic. Every surface held a thin, cold film of dust that seemed to absorb all sound. The quiet here wasn't empty. It was waiting. A bell jingled as they pushed inside, the air thick with the scent of burnt coffee and stale grease. Waitress Betty offered a practiced smile, her beehive hairdo immaculate, yet her eyes remained flat and unmoving. From the counter, old Henry gave a slow, silent nod, his gaze lingering a moment too long. The warmth felt artificial, a thin veneer over a quiet that prickled the skin. His movements were fluid, yet unnervingly rehearsed, like a well-oiled machine performing a familiar routine. Betty's voice cut through the tense air. Heavens, you two look soaked. Sit anywhere, dears. Coffee's fresh. A faint, sweet scent of brewing coffee mingled with the damp, earthy odor clinging to their clothes. They were polite, their forced smiles not quite reaching their eyes as a heavy, watchful stillness settled over the room. The server was unnervingly polite. The coffee tasted like perfection, the pie like true homemade comfort. But Sarah's gaze kept drifting to the clock behind the counter, frozen at 4:17. A strange hush settled over the room, muting even the clink of her fork. The air grew thick, tasting faintly of old sugar and dust. Her skin prickled as a deep, internal alarm began to sound. That single, silent detail of the stopped clock felt like a crack in the world's facade. Every ounce of comfort from the meal curdled into a cold, sticky dread. Something was profoundly wrong here, and the calendar was from October 1958. Sarah whispered to Mike, her voice barely a breath. Did you see that? No one was speaking. They were just sitting there, motionless. While the scent of old paper and damp wood clung to the air, Mike tried to steady her nerves. They're just small-town folks. You're spooked from the long drive. Sarah didn't respond. Her gaze fixed on something unseen. The air smelled faintly of old grease and damp earth. Without a word, she pushed her chair back, the scrape of metal on tile echoing in a sudden quiet. "I need to use the restroom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of the refrigerator. As the fluorescent light stuttered overhead, she finished washing her hands. Her own eyes met hers in the mirror. But for a splinter of time, the reflection wasn't the clean white-tiled room. It was a decayed, grimy chamber. The mirror webbed with fractures. The ceiling collapsed inward. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she spun around, her pulse hammering in her ears. The room returned to its mundane state, but the air felt thick with residual unease. Narrator. The first law of Perdition. Never let it catch you looking too intently. Outside, the storm raged with a vengeance, rattling the old window frames. Betty delivered the grim news. The bridge was washed out, and Carl, the only mechanic, couldn't look at their mysteriously dead car until morning. They had no choice but to stay at the Perdition Motor Lodge. Mike collapsed onto the bed and was asleep in moments, his exhaustion absolute. But Sarah lay rigid beside him, her eyes wide and fixed on the ceiling. The air in the room felt thin and metallic, like the inside of an old refrigerator, and every faint hum from the walls seemed to carry a whisper. She heard whispers filtering through the ventilation shaft. Not distinct words, but fragmented echoes of conversations. Rising, she moved to the window and peered through the blinds into the storm. A figure stood motionless across the street, under a lone lamppost, drenched by the downpour. The air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and damp concrete, tightening around her. He stood motionless, his gaze locked on the windows of the room. Sarah froze, her breath catching as she strained to distinguish his features. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic. She blinked once, and he had vanished into the darkness. They didn't just walk away, they were gone, vanished, between one heartbeat and the next. The following day unfolded as a nightmare of polite evasion. Every question was met with averted eyes and a tight, practiced smile that didn't reach the eye. A damp, metallic scent clung to the air where they stood, the only evidence anything had ever been wrong. The sun blazed overhead, but its light carried no warmth. They attempted to walk toward the town's edge, but the streets refused to let them leave. Every turn seemed to fold back upon itself in a silent, geometric mockery. 3 times, the same crimson mailbox appeared, its paint gleaming under the frigid glare. Every local they passed was smiling, frozen in unnatural poses. A woman sweeping an already spotless porch, a man polishing a gleaming car window, until their gaze fell upon them. Then, the motions completed with impossible, jerking speed. Mike's breath hitched, a cold sweat breaking on his skin as the scent of ozone and damp earth filled the air. Mike. Okay, something is very wrong here. Sarah. They're not real, Mike. Or perhaps they're not here at all. Not in the way we perceive reality. Driven by a suffocating dread, Sarah forces her focus onto the diner's buzzing neon sign. The air thickens with the scent of ozone and stale grease, a tangible weight pressing against her skin. Every instinct screams to look away, but she holds her gaze, a silent plea into the static-filled dark. She looks away at the ground, counts to 2, and snaps her head back. For an instant, she sees a broken, dark sign, swinging on one chain. The second rule of Perdition. It can only hold its shape under direct observation. Look away, and the truth bleeds through. The town was swallowed by a darkness deeper than any night they'd ever known. Mike and Sarah, hearts hammering against their ribs, decided to risk a desperate dash for the woods. As they slipped from cover, a metallic scent of ozone hanging in the damp air, their eyes were drawn to the town square. The townsfolk stood there, utterly motionless, a silent congregation frozen in some unthinkable ritual. Not a word was spoken. They weren't praying, they were listening. Sarah and Mike bolted into the dense woods. Twigs snapped like breaking bones beneath their frantic steps. Behind them, no footsteps echoed. Only the rustle of movement just to their left, the crackle of leaves just beyond their sight. They burst into a clearing, and the air grew heavy with the scent of ozone and damp earth. And there it stood, the true Perdition. A primal dread took hold, their breath hitching in the sudden, oppressive stillness. A ghost town stood before them, its foundations choked with weeds and the skeletal remains of buildings burned to ash decades ago. The rusted hulk of a 1950s car lay half swallowed by the earth, its oxidized metal groaning softly in the breeze, and in the center of the clearing, perfectly still, stood the townsfolk. The air carried the faint, metallic scent of old rain on iron and the damp chill of undisturbed earth, or what's left of them, translucent and flickering. Their faces are locked in expressions of eternal surprise and terror. They are all staring at one spot, the foundation of the old church. Mike's breath hitched, the air growing heavy with the scent of damp earth and ozone. Terrified, he whispered, "What are they looking at? What's there?" Against every instinct, Sarah followed their gaze to the empty space. Then, She did the unthinkable. She closed her eyes. Instantly, the forest's ambient sounds vanished. In the absolute quiet, a damp chill seeped through her clothes, and the faint scent of ozone pricked her senses. Her vision dissolved into the town's memory, a cacophony from the past overwhelming her senses. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone and scorched timber, the roar of a voracious fire drowning out all else. A frantic, discordant bell clanged through the smoke, its peals laced with human terror. October 4th, 1958. 4:17 p.m. She wasn't seeing with her eyes anymore. A fire, a tragedy that erased Perdition from the map in a single, agonizing instant. These people were not ghosts haunting a place. They were a moment, a second, trapped in an endless loop of collective panic, forever trying, and failing, to comprehend their own violent end. Sarah's eyes snapped open, the phantom sounds vanishing into an oppressive hush. The spectral forms had all turned toward her and Mike, their faces now locked in a silent, unnatural stare. Their expressions had shifted completely, no longer vacant but fixed with a chilling, predatory focus. A heavy, metallic scent filled the air as the figures remained motionless, their attention an almost physical weight. From stark terror to a desperate, hungry longing. The third and final rule of Perdition. A ghost is a story stuck on repeat, and the only way for such a story to continue is with a new character. The figures remained motionless, frozen in their silent vigil, but the very world around Mike and Sarah began to shift, the air thickening with the scent of ozone and old dust. Behind them, the woods solidify into a perfect, picturesque town. The diner, the motel, the lampposts, they materialize from the surrounding corruption, boxing them in completely. This town isn't trying to chase them. It's trying to rewrite them, to paste them into its endless, looping postcard. The air grows heavy with the scent of ozone and old paper as reality snaps back to the present. Sarah's cell phone footage trembled as she filmed Mike standing motionless under the lone street lamp in Perdition's deserted Main Street. Her whispered plea cut through the static-charged air. Mike, don't look at them. The scent of ozone and damp earth clung to the night as something unseen shifted in the surrounding blackness. Every instinct screamed at Sarah to stay hidden, her fingers going numb against the cold phone case. Mike's tears traced glistening paths down his face as he stared into the phone's screen. His voice cracked with a raw desperation that hung in the thick, still air of the room. "Just look at me," he pleaded, his words barely a whisper against the oppressive quiet. Through the phone, "Keep your eyes on me." His gaze remained locked on Sarah's image, a silent anchor in the growing dread. Behind him, the smiling, motionless figures of Betty, Henry, and the others draw nearer, halting just beyond the lamplight's edge. They cannot cross the threshold of his direct, sustained gaze, a fragile barrier against the unnatural. The air carries the scent of old dust and something faintly metallic, like cold iron. This is where we are now. I'm recording this. As long as Mike keeps his eyes locked on my face on this screen, the town maintains its fragile, beautiful facade, but the illusion is tethered to a dying battery. A low, electrical hum fills the air as the phone's charge dwindles to a mere 4%. The air grows thick with the scent of ozone and the dread of what waits when the screen goes dark. The battery flickered down to a desperate 3%, each percentage point vanishing like a final breath. Mike's exhaustion was a physical weight, his eyelids leaden and pleading for surrender. As his eyes finally, inevitably, began to close, the screen stuttered and died. In the sudden, absolute dark, Sarah's voice was a raw thread of terror. "Just hold on, Mike." The screen's image began to fracture into digital snow, pixels crawling across the feed like static insects. Mike's terrified expression warped and stretched, his features melting into a grotesque, elongated smear. Behind him, the assembled townsfolk, their smiles fixed and unwavering, began to stutter in and out of existence. Each flicker lasted a fraction of a second, revealing not an empty space, but a brief, jarring glimpse of something dark and shapeless, lurking just behind the veil of reality. For a single, horrifying frame, the clearing flickered with the spectral forms of the burnt and terrified. The video feed erupted into violent static, tearing the image apart. Then, for one final, crystalline second, it cleared. We saw Mike, his eyes wide with a terrible understanding. He wasn't looking at the phone anymore. His gaze was fixed on something just over Sarah's shoulder, a primal dread freezing him in place before the screen plunged into absolute blackness. A soft, collective sigh of relief washed through the air, not from one direction, but from everywhere at once. The town of Perdition, Ohio doesn't exist unless you're lost, unless you're alone, unless you blink. Tonight, as you extinguish the lamp and darkness reclaims your room, before your eyelids finally surrender to sleep, can you truly be certain you are the only one here? A sudden, sharp intake of breath cuts through the quiet, not your own.
Like the journey? Subscribe and join the next expedition.